Are Micro Four Thirds cameras dead? Well, Panasonic definitely do not think so. With the release of the brand new GH7, things are starting to get a little interesting. In this video, we're going to take a look at the pros and the cons of the camera, if the extra 32-bit float audio and Arri log C upgrades are worth the money, and finally, we will answer the question, does it make sense to buy a Micro Four Thirds camera in 2024? As a firm member of the Full Frame Elite Club, I did question the choice and the timing of the GH7 announcement, with Panasonic's community patiently waiting for the announcement of the new flagship full frame camera, whatever that may be. But there is so much more to this camera than you are thinking. If I've learned anything from reviewing the GH7, it is that bigger sensors do not mean better images, and there is so much more what goes into making a good camera than just the size of its sensor. Where most buyers of this camera will be coming from, and I reckon firstly they'll be coming from either the GH5 or the GH6. So one of the big questions I'm going to try and answer here is it worth upgrading from a previous GH camera? And the second may be that you're wanting to join the Panasonic ecosystem and you cannot make your mind up between, say, the S5 II or waiting for the GH7. I've been using the GH7 over the past 2 weeks and I put it across a range of different projects. I've done content creation, I've done vlogging, I've even shot a wedding on it and done loads of audio stuff like interviews and testing out the 32-bit float. So I'm going to give you my own personal answers to those exact questions in this video. So let me break down what it is actually like to use the GH7 in the real world. We're starting off with a super strong point for the GH7, and that is build quality. For what this thing costs, it is everything you'd expect and probably a little bit more. It has dust and weather sealing and is also freeze resistant. It has no kind of weak points, none of the buttons feel cheap or nothing wobbles in like weird ways. It is just kind of a step above, say, an S5 II or a Sony A7 IV, and more in line with like an S1H body or say an A1 from Sony. And this continues on into the design elements of the camera. Everything is laid out exactly where I would probably put it for a body design this size. From day one of using the camera, it was just pleasant, and from there it just got better and better and better. It even has 2 custom buttons on the front next to the lens and also a record button. It just feels like they have utilised every inch of the body they could, considering how small it is. We have a dedicated audio button on top of the camera, and we also have a lock switch, which is something that you normally tend to see on maybe higher budget cameras. What this lock switch enables you to do is when you turn it on, it just disables every single button on the camera but leaves the camera rolling. This is good for if you're doing some sort of like event work and you want to kind of set it up, press record and just leave it. It just means no one can mess with your camera or you're not going to accidentally press a button and make any mistakes. Being a H camera from Panasonic means it is aimed at professional video users, and all these little buttons and locks just make you feel like it is. We also have the massive vents behind the screens that kind of pull air in from one side and push air out from the other. This is what we've seen on older GH cameras, but it's just a really good way to keep the camera cool. With Lumix's history and none of their cameras really ever overheating, I don't think no matter how much you've recorded on this camera, you would ever see any issues. And while we're talking about the design, we may as well touch on the screen. Every now and then you use a feature on a newer camera, or maybe just a different camera to your own, that you just cannot go back from. And the screen on the GH7 is one of those things. The way it pulls out and locks in 2 different places when you don't want to have the screen hanging away from the body is where I use this camera about 75% of the time. And for when you're maybe doing something like vlogging or the camera's high up or low down and you want to kind of pull it out and you can do the full 360 thing, there is just no compromises with this screen design. I know the likes of Sony also use this screen design, but the fact that Lumix are putting this kind of design in such a small body with a small sensor that comes from their higher end full frame cameras, and the same with Sony, it's in their high end full frame cameras, just shows you how serious they are about this camera. One of the biggest new features about this camera is the ability to capture internal RAW. Now this is a massive deal for a hybrid camera, as I believe there is no other hybrid cameras out there that do this. maybe a Canon or something might do it in Canon RAW light. Let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong. And I personally love capturing internal RAW on my Sony cameras and Blackmagic cameras, so I totally get why this is such a big deal. But being someone who solo edits in DaVinci Resolve, ProRes RAW is just simply not an option for my workflow. I did run some quick tests in Premiere Pro between the ProRes RAW and the ProRes 422, and I didn't really see much of a difference. So if I was to purchase this camera, then I would probably just capture in the ProRes 422. But if you're someone who edits in Final Cut and ProRes RAW is an option for you, then I would definitely capture in that codec. I must admit, one of the strongest points inside this camera is just the range of different codecs. The way you can shoot all the way from ProRes 422 and ProRes RAW, and then come all the way down in resolution inside of ProRes, and then you can capture in MOV and H.265, coming all the way down in different bit rates and resolutions inside there. I guess you could also see this as a bit of a negative though, because it's extremely overwhelming with how much choice there is. But Lumix do allow you inside the menu to create your own favorites list, so you can just work out which ones you really want to use all the time and maybe make a list of 3 or 4, and that solves that problem. One great example of this was testing the GH7 at a wedding. To capture some of the hero shots of the couple, I would be in ProRes 422 in like 50 or 60 frames per second. And then I would also drop into the MOV to capture 120 frames per second. During the ceremony and speeches, I would be in like a 4K 150 megabytes H.265. There's just something for all the scenarios to help you save on space across your memory cards. Knowing which scenarios require the really high-end ones and which don't is really quite freeing. The 4K 120 frames per second is limited to H.265 in the MOV codec inside this camera, so you cannot go to those super high frame rates in ProRes. ProRes allows you to go up to 60 frames per second, what I think is totally fine considering how small the body is. This camera has something called dynamic range boost, what gives you more dynamic range when you are below 60 frames per second. So obviously when you move up into this 120 frames, you do lose the dynamic range boost. You have around 13 stops when using 60 or below, and you lose around 2 or 3 down to around 11 stops when in 120 frames. Overall though, outside of the internal ProRes RAW, there is really not any differences between this and the GH6. It has the same frame rates, resolutions and codecs, I believe. Although I do think they have fixed the dynamic range boost, what used to be a lot more limited in the GH6. Comparing it to like an S5 II or an S1H, so there is some big benefits to using the smaller sensor. You just get 120 in 4K that we have not seen from Panasonic yet, and it cuts and matches really well compared to its 50 and 60p, 25 and 24p counterparts. Let's talk about 32-bit flow audio. For anybody who does not know what this is, it allows you to capture really quiet sounds or really loud sounds without any distortion. And then later on, when you get to the edit, you can bring them up or down as you please. This removes any need to monitor audio levels inside of your recording device, or as of now, inside of your camera, as the GH7 is the world's first camera to have internal 32-bit flow audio capture. It's good to note here though that 32-bit flow audio is not some kind of cheat code to getting great audio. The number one most important factor is the mic placement, and 32-bit does not fix that. Let's say if your shotgun mic or lav mic is far away from a subject and it captures them really quietly, when you bring up that volume, you're going to bring up all the room tone with it, and this will sound really bad. But when you do have your mic in a good place, if your lav mic is nice and close to the person speaking, or your shotgun mic is as close as it could be in an interview, then not having to monitor audio levels, especially for a one-man band or small crews, is actually game changing. To enable 32-bit flow audio on the GH7, you will need the brand new XLR unit that mounts on the hot shoe of the camera. This adds 2 XLRs and one 3.5mm jack. It does cost an extra $500, And there are two different ways you could look at this cost. One is it does take the camera into a higher price point and kind of competes it against even better full frame cameras. But secondly, you could look at it as a Zoom F3, which is a separate 32-bit float audio recorder with 2 inputs, 2 full-size XLRs, costs around $400. Now this would have to be mounted on camera, separate batteries, something else to charge, need its own memory card, and still not sync up to the footage you capture. Seeing that it's only $500 for this XLR unit that goes on top of the GH7, is wire free and also powers through the hot shoe off your internal GH7 battery, I think it's quite a good deal. Once the XLR unit is attached to the top of the camera, you do have to run all audio through it. The mistake I made was trying to plug like 2 lavs, one into the port on the camera and one into the 3.5mm jack on the XLR unit, but the one on the camera is disabled. You can go into the settings and turn this on, but then that does disable 32-bit float audio. So that's a little odd and tricky, but just good to know. A lot of people have been asking me whether the XLR unit works on other Lumix cameras. The only one I own is the S5 II, and testing it on my S5 II, it does not recognise it at all. There is no 32-bit audio options. There is not even options to capture it in 24-bit audio as normal. It just does not recognise the inputs at all. Hopefully though, this can be fixed via a firmware update, as I believe if Lumix did fix this, that a lot of S5 II owners would purchase this XLR unit. On to what I believe is the main reason anybody should upgrade from their older GH cameras into the GH7. And that is, we now have Lumix's brand new dual pixel AF system. We have all seen how Lumix introduced this into the S5 II and then put it inside of the G9 and then released the update for the S5 II to make it even better. Well, I'm happy to say that they have taken it a step further once again. I think now that we have the first H branded camera with this new autofocus system, tells you how much Panasonic are starting to trust it, and I don't think it'll be too long until we see it in many more. It really is going to be night and day difference comparing this dual pixel AF to the contrast based AF from the GH6 and older. Personally, I think having a usable AF for video is one of the main reasons people buy these kind of hybrid cinema camera style bodies. There are lots of other options out there in the budget cinema camera world that don't have AF at all, and I think they are better options if you do not need AF. So bringing AF to the GH7 makes it a really good deal. For me, this camera has the best AF system we've seen in any Lumix camera today. To keep things short and simple, I would now say that Lumix are at the stage where they are better than Canon and match Sony when it comes to tracking faces and eyes, and maybe even beating Sony when it comes to AI detection modes, as now we have more. I would say there is one area, and that is tracking objects, where Sony is still king, and that is where you tap on an object on the screen and as it moves around or you move the camera, it stays locked on. There is still just a little bit of work to be done for Lumix here, but once that is done, they may have the best autofocus system around. We also now have a new IBIS mode inside the GH7, and this is the same one we have seen come to the S5 II via a firmware update. It comes under the stabilization setting, which is Lumix's software stabilization. So inside of the cameras, you have the physical stabilization that comes around the sensor. Then above that, you have software stabilization. Lumix brand this as stabilization, and inside this, we have 2 options. One is standard, what comes with a 1.1 times crop, and 2 is high, and this comes with a 1.5 times crop. Using this with an image stabilized lens on the GH7, honestly, if you just walk with it and try and be a little bit steady, you would be hard to tell it is not a gimbal. You can even run with it and the footage is pretty usable. Right, we're about to get into image quality, but just before we do that, I've been getting so many questions of people asking me whether I think the GH7 is better than the S5 II. And I'm going to be running side-by-side tests, but it would just make this video way too long. So make sure to hit the sub button not to miss it, because it is coming up in the next week or 2. I will have that ready, going through all the different aspects of both cameras in a direct comparison. Let's start off talking about the best this camera has to offer. That would be the 5.8K open gate inside of ProRes. And to put it simply, It just does not belong in a camera this small. It has the look and feel of a much more expensive camera. It is very cinematic and can easily be used on anything from like low to medium size and budget projects. Sometimes I do wish there was a little bit more depth inside of my image, mainly on the wide end, but I have only been testing this camera really with its kit lens, which is f2.8 to f4. And that, in the terms of micro four thirds sensors, is not very good. I believe that if you bought a better zoom lens, like I've seen, is it the 10 to 25mm f1.7, like that lens would probably bring me the depth that I wanted. The colours in Vlog are as solid as they've ever been, and it does come with a little more detail and better contrast straight out of camera than I have seen in previous Lumix cameras. When I tested the S1H and the S5 Mark II, I noticed there was like this green tint in the lower to mid section of the images that I always like to correct, but I'm happy to tell you that in the GH7 that is gone. Something that a lot of people don't talk about is that when you go into the higher frame rates of a lot of cameras, even though they may be listed as 4K 120 frames per second, you take a hit in quality in other ways. I'm sure I read somewhere that the FX30 and the A7S III dropped to around 9 point something stops of dynamic range when shooting 120 frames 4K. And there's been so many times across multiple manufacturers where I've hired in cameras, and when jumping into the 120 frames per second mode, there has been pixel binning and it has looked awful. But I'm happy to say that the 120 frames 4K inside the GH7 is really good. If this is something you need or use in part of your workflow, then you're going to be really happy with the results you can get. We do also keep the dual pixel autofocus inside of the 120 frames, which is rare because a lot of cameras don't do AF when in these high frame rates, but it is not quite as good as the one you get in 24 or 25 frames per second. It works really well and you can rely on it, but for some reason you cannot use any of the detection modes, so it does not track people's faces, bodies or animals or any of that stuff. The way you have to work it is by just tapping on the person on the screen, and as mentioned before, this is not Lumix's strongest point when it comes to AF. That said though, to even keep AF inside of 120 is definitely a win. One of the disadvantages of buying a small sensor camera is normally low light, but Lumix have made this sensor inside the GH7 backside illuminated. Now all this means in simple terms is it allows more light to pass through the sensor. So let's do some low light tests to work our way through all the different ISOs to see what it can actually do. All these low light tests are captured at ProRes 422 HQ, and here at 500 ISO, which is the native, things are looking pretty damn good. Moving on up to 1600 ISO, and there's a little bit of noise creeping into the black, but nothing major, and this is still really usable. 6400 ISO, and we can definitely start to see some noise. This is probably still usable with a bit of denoise in post-production. Moving up to the max ISO of 12800, and we can now see noise all over the image. This is probably not usable, but if you really had to and needed to capture footage at this max ISO with a little bit of post-production work, you can probably still use it. When trying to think of negatives for the GH7, I did find it really difficult. It is a super well balanced camera. There is the obvious one of the smaller sensor being a negative in a world that's dominated by full frame, but this is also a positive. There is definitely times where having the small sensor benefits us, as we are in a world where the engineering is just not quite there for full frame cameras to give us all the frame rates and resolutions that we are asking for. There is also a lot of live events work where I would take the micro four thirds sensor over a full frame sensor all day long. Hence why for the last couple of decades, smaller sensors have dominated the broadcast world. So would I upgrade from a GH6 into the GH7? The way I see it is Arilog C is also coming to the GH6. The 32-bit flow audio, you could just go out and buy an external recorder. And I personally don't see much of a difference between ProRes RAW and ProRes 422. So it really comes down to one question. Do you want or need market-leading AF inside of your camera? If the answer is yes, and you are going to benefit, you constantly take footage and think, I wish my AF system was better and that would have made the whole project better, then I would upgrade. But if you're someone who uses cinema lenses, or just does not rely on autofocus because you are not that type of shooter, then the answer is no. When it comes to capturing video, bigger sensors definitely do not mean better image quality, and the GH7 is proof. After testing it, I can safely say it is better than 75% of full frame cameras on sale today that I have personally tested. I am personally waiting on my direct comparison with the S5 II before I make my mind up on if I want to buy one. So go check out my channel to see if that is already out, and if not, and you want to help your buying decision a little more, you need to watch this video here.